Now, the United States is going to see another big change in the 1990s, not just from the economy finally recovering, but also due to immigration. So, the biggest period of immigration in American history is not actually 1890 to, say, 1920, which is when we tend to think of American immigration, right? Ellis Island in the popular imagination, but actually more immigrants come to the United States between 1965 and 2010. Okay. During that time period, 38 million people immigrate to the United States. In comparison, between 1880 and 1924, only 27 million came to the United States. So by the year 2010, in that year's census, 40 million Americans put down on the census that they had been born outside of the United States. Part of this growth in immigration post 1965 was as a result of immigration reform that passed during Johnson's time in office, the Hart-Celler Act, which removed quotas for all places but Latin America, where they added quotas where there hadn't been before, and also changed the system to privilege family immigration, right, to reunite families who already had loved ones in the United States, and also to prioritize immigrants with higher skilled jobs or higher job skills. And we can see that when we look at this group of immigrants in comparison with the older generation, the older big wave of immigrants at the dawn of the 20th century. So we have new types of ethnicities, new nationalities immigrating to the United States. And so they form their own ethnic communities. We see, unlike in previous immigration movements, we do see some immigrants going directly to suburbs, whereas before many immigrants went to urban areas, especially in the East Coast and Midwest. Now we're seeing immigrants to the United States spread out across the United States, and in some cases revitalizing older neighborhoods and transforming demographics in the areas that they settle. Some immigrants also do settle in the Midwest, which had been starting to see population loss after World War I through World War II, adding more diversity to local populations. And when we look at the impact of globalization on immigrants, we can see that the Cold War is driving a lot of these immigrants. We're seeing refugee populations, people fleeing communist states. We're also see people coming to the United States for job opportunities, again, driven by a more integrated global economy. Skilled workers might not have the same kinds of job opportunities as before where they came from. So they came to the United States, like a lot of immigrants have historically, looking for better job opportunities. And on average, immigrants coming in during this more recent time period have better education and better job skills than immigrants who came to the United States in earlier centuries. In 2000, 40% of immigrants in the United States already had a college degree before they came to the United States. There are also, during this time period, more women coming than men. Partly explained by the fact that the manufacturing economy, which was declining, had traditionally attracted male immigrants to work, more manual jobs. So that's kind of upending this reason why traditionally immigration had skewed more heavily male. And these new immigrants coming to the United States are going to provide much more racial, ethnic, and religious diversity in the United States. And we're going to see a spike in what we call multiculturalism. So we've talked earlier in class, if you're one of my students, about how there was this debate between Americanization and cultural pluralism in the 1920s. So Americanization is this idea that all immigrants, when they come to the United States, have to completely assimilate to mainstream American culture and give up their traditions and their values and everything else that kind of makes them more distinct. Whereas cultural pluralism was, yes, we should assimilate to some American ideas, right? Speak English, participate in voting, in politics, but also still retain and celebrate our unique cultural heritage. So what we're going to see in the United States in the 1990s is a move towards that idea of cultural pluralism, this embrace of these multiple diverse identities. So if you look at a chart charting the pattern of immigration between the 1960s and the 1990s, you're going to see a very different pattern of immigration than you do during earlier time periods in American history. 50% of these immigrants between 1965 and 2000 are coming from Latin America or the Caribbean. In earlier waves of immigration, much of the immigration had been driven by Europe. But Europe at this point in time, during the same time period, 1960s to the 1990s, only represents about 10% of all immigrants. One of the fastest growing areas is immigration from Asia. About 35% of immigrants between the 1960s and the 1990s come from Asia. And then an area which we've seen increasing post 2000 is immigrants coming from what, if you're looking at this on YouTube and seeing the video, is described as other. And that would include Africa and the Middle East, which the United States has seen increasing immigration from those two regions post 2000. So, what I wanted to do was talk a little bit about the experiences of these newly dominant groups in immigration, talk a little bit about Latinx Americans and their experiences during this time period, talk about Asian Americans, who again are a rapidly growing sector of immigrant population, but also African Americans, because they are also included in this immigrant population. Many people coming from the Caribbean are of African descent, people from Africa coming over, and they're mixing with the existing African American population. And we're going to check in with them and see how they're doing in the 1990s as well.